Welcome to the Detroit Lions News podcast on JC Sports YouTube page. This is out. This video is strictly going to be about do you trust Dan or not. I see a lot of people out there, and it's not their fault. A lot of them are kind of dull in the head. I want this guy. I want Robert Salah. I don't want Johnny Morton. I want Tanner Engstrand. I want this guy. I want a proven offensive coordinator. When Dan Campbell first came to Detroit, he hired Anthony Lynn. I think every one of us, when he hired Anthony Lynn, was like, that's a damn good pick." Anthony Lynn, former head coach, have on the staff. What could go wrong? It didn't last 6, 7 games. Dan Campbell ended up taking over the play calling. This offense started mirroring what Dan Campbell wanted in his offense. Dan Campbell made the playbook. They started doing things the way that they do it now. And we could say that this is Dan Campbell's offense. Even though Ben Johnson was calling the offense, this is Dan Campbell's offense. If you go back to when they fired Anthony Lynn, just go back when they fired Anthony Lynn. You go back, you watch that game from Pittsburgh on. There was 3 games without Jared Goff, and they still ran the same plays with Tim Boyle and David Blau. It looked like shit, but that's what they were doing. They go into the second year, more talent. There's more opportunities for this team to be more better. Amon-Ra St. Brown comes on the scene. He came on late on the scene his first rookie year. He started to really hit his strides late in the year. Obviously, he hit his strides that next season, but it all built up. When Dan Campbell promoted Kelvin Shepard, I heard a lot of people go, I wanted a Robert Salah. I wanted a proven offensive coordinator. Nah. Look, we seen Dan Campbell hire proven guys. We've seen it. We've seen it with Anthony Lynn, and it didn't work out. And unfortunately for Dan Campbell, he knows exactly what this team needs. We could sit here all day long. We could talk about what the Lions should do here and there. But you just got to remember one thing about this Detroit Lions team and this franchise. Since Dan Campbell has taken over this team, since Dan and Brad came on the scene, there has been one thing that's been constant with this team. One thing. They do it their way. And not everyone is fit to be a Detroit Lion. Not everyone is fit to be a Detroit Lion. This goes back to, if you were a Red Wings fan back in the day. And not everyone was built to be a Detroit Red Wing. It's just the way it was. Not everyone was built to be a Detroit Red Wing. Not everyone was built to be playing on the same line as Bert Hall and Steve Duchesne and Darren McCarty and the grind line and Yzerman and Shanahan and Yzerman and Fedorov. There's not many people that were meant to be Detroit Red Wings. The same is said for the Detroit Lions. Not everyone is meant to be a Detroit Lions head coach. Coach. There's a lot of good coaches out there. Dennis Allen was one that I liked. But not everyone is meant to be a Lions coach. Not everyone is meant to be a Detroit Lions player. The good organizations have their preference. They have their style. And they only go after those guys. The smart, the successful ones, that's the way they do things. The Baltimore Ravens, the New England Patriots with Belichick and Brady, the Chiefs do it. The Steelers have done it for decades. When you wear a certain uniform and you got a guy like Dan Campbell, as brash as he is, as macho as he is, he's a very smart dude. Dan Campbell is a hell of a smart guy. And when he picks out people to be a part of his team, it's not because he thinks that you're, a prototypical Detroit Lion. How do you fit? What can you do? What's going to happen when you have adversity? And I thought, picking Kelvin Shepard is a guy who those linebackers, everyone across the board played fantastic under Kelvin Shepard. I can't wait to see what he does with the defense. John Morton, imagine that he was on this team in 2022 as a senior offensive assistant. Dan Campbell knows exactly who he is. It knows exactly what makes him tick. And there is a quote from Jeremy Reisman where he said, you know, Johnny was a big part in Tanner Engstrand's development. Look, guys, I'll just say like this. You've seen what happened this year with all these players. All these players were hurt. And you've seen exactly what they did with all these players hurt. They fought adversity. They did what they were supposed to do because not everyone has the ability to be a Detroit Lion. You know, Aaron Glenn, I love Aaron Glenn. I thought he did a phenomenal job with the defense, granted the circumstances he was under. He was missing half his effing defense, and he was on third and fourth string guys. And I don't care what you guys say or who you talk about. This whole next man up, it only goes so far. You can't go next man up at you can't go next man up at every damn position and think you're gonna get somewhere. I watch Aaron Glenn in the face of adversity with his defense, where he was missing Alex Anzalone at one point. No Carlton Davis, no Lee McNeil, no Aiden Hutchinson, no Marcus Davenport, no Derek Barnes, no Malcolm Rodriguez, and he's going out there and they're winning games. Not every coach is cut out to do that. Not every coach is cut out to do that. When we talk about the Detroit Lions and we talk about what does it mean to be a Detroit Lion, not everyone is cut out to be it. Not everyone is, not every player that comes in the draft is cut out to be it. Not every free agent that comes into the free agent class is cut out to be a Detroit Lion. Because Dan and Brad have shown they know what it takes to make their team good. The fact that you went 15-2 with the amount of injuries that the Detroit Lions had this year was absolutely phenomenal. I don't think there's anyone across in football that would say you lose all these players for 3 games or more, and you finish 15-2. Dan Campbell knows what he's doing. And if you think for 1 second that Dan Campbell is going to make a bad decision, I will hearken you back to when he made the decision to fire Anthony Lynn and the decision to fire Aubrey Pleasant. When Dan Campbell knows he made a mistake in hiring someone, or Brad Holmes knows he made a mistake in drafting someone or signing someone, they admit it right away. They take accountability for their actions. So when Dan Campbell hires a guy like Johnny Morton, who has been with the Detroit Lions, he knows what Johnny Morton's all about. When you hire a guy like Kelvin Shepard, who did a damn good job with your linebackers, losing every effing linebacker that you had, it just, you got to trust what Dan Campbell has been able to do. He's the one that made Ben Johnson the offensive coordinator and let him call the plays. He's the one that found Aaron Glenn, head coach. He's the one that got Terrell Williams, who's now the DC in New England. Dan Campbell has shown the ability to not only go out and get the best talent. That's Brett Holmes, what he does with the best talent. But Dan Campbell's been known to go out and get the best coaches for his team. And everyone, you had a lot of coaches poached. JT Barrett, you had Antoine Randall, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Terrell Williams. You had a lot of coaches poached. And usually in the NFL, you don't take a coach for nothing. You take a coach because you believe in them. And what Dan Campbell was able to assemble as a coaching staff, and what Dan Campbell has been able to assemble as they have left for greener pastures. Jets head coach, Bears head coach. You've seen what Dan Campbell's been all about. And what Dan Campbell's all about is exactly what it is. He knows what this pulse of this team is. And in the face of adversity, the coach that he trusted on the defensive coordinator, which was Aaron Glenn, he went out there and balled with third and fourth stringers. And when you want to know what being a Detroit Lion truly is, when you want to know what a Detroit Lion truly is, look no further what Aaron Glenn did this year. Look no further. You know, a lot of defensive coordinators could have been like, dude, I give up. I've lost every effing player on my defense. I don't know what to do. I got a guy like Al-Quadin Muhammad as my defensive end. I do have, Terry Arnold and Meek Robertson. Meek Robertson, gets hurt. I'm down to the bare bones. I got no linebackers besides Alex and Jack that I expected to be here. And you got your two safeties, but make no bones about it. Every game they went into, they didn't have the pass rush. They were going to have to blitz a ton. So when you want to know what it means to be a Detroit Lion, Aaron Glenn was a good description of what it means to be a Detroit Lion and what Dan Campbell's all about. What they were able to do with that defense going 15-2, you will never see a better coaching job by a defensive coordinator than what Aaron Glenn did this year. Period. And whatever decision Dan Campbell makes about his coaching staff, I have a good feeling that he knows exactly what he's getting out of those guys. So I'm not going to say I don't trust the guy because he's shown me that I can trust him. No problem. And if he makes a mistake, he will tell you because he'll get rid of the guy. He did it with Anthony Lynn. He did it with Aubrey Pleasant. He did it with the one defensive backs coach. He will admit his mistakes and cut his losses and get it better, get it back on track, because that's the kind of leader Dan Campbell is. A lot of people, they think about Dan Campbell and they go, oh my God, macho man. Dude's really smart. Dude is really, really smart. And that offense, that's his. You'll see this year. That's Dan Campbell's offense. So let's see what Dan Campbell wants to do. Obviously promoted Kelvin Sheppard to DC. That's a great one because what Kelvin Sheppard did with the linebackers. He's probably going to hire Johnny Morton. He kept Hank Fraley on. We'll see what he does as this goes on, but I like the way that Dan Campbell is building things, and I think that the best is ahead for the Detroit Lions and this team. And not everyone is cut out to be a Detroit Lion. Just remember that. We'll see you on tomorrow's podcast as we talk Detroit Lions News podcast. It'll be a season recap. We'll be talking season recap, coaching news, because I imagine there's going to be more coaching news tomorrow. And then we'll do a look ahead to the off season. So join us for that on the Detroit Lions News podcast on G Sports YouTube page, Detroit Lions News podcast, Detroit Joe Chap, and then wherever you get your podcasts on any platform. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next video as we talk more Detroit Lions football here on Detroit Lions News podcast on G Sports YouTube page.